This mini lecture will be a bit longer than the others, simply because Rachel Carson is such an important figure to the environmental movement and to environmental literature. I've gathered some longish quotes from Carson's biographer Linda Lear and a few others, and at points I will ask you to pause this presentation and read these materials. They will provide context for an overview of Carson's important contributions to environmentalist thinking. From this slide, we see that Carson was already an established writer when Silent Spring appeared in 1962, and today's readers tend to forget that her earlier works on coastline ecology made for popular reading among science-oriented readers. One of the major challenges in communicating Carson's significance to today's readers is to explain the climate in which she wrote. In the post-war era, people were generally quite heavily confident in the idea of progress and were eager to adapt wartime industries to peacetime pursuits. Wartime industrialists reaped heavy profits by adapting their operations to civilian purposes, and the example of the pesticide DDT serves well to demonstrate this fact. These two images are designed to express the ethos of the era and to confirm Lear's claim that in the 50s and 1960s, science was God and science was male. Here we see the actual slogans from DuPont and Monsanto, two well-known chemical companies whose products continue to generate controversy even today. As a woman scientist, Carson was regarded suspiciously by a male scientific establishment. She endured attacks based on her gender and upon her character. This paragraph by Lear sums up the effort to discredit Carson's ideas in Silent Spring. You are linked also below to a parody of Silent Spring composed by the writers of the Monsanto Corporation, and it might be worthwhile to give this look once you've read over some materials written by Carson herself. Please take a moment to review this slide. Silent Spring primarily seeks to warn its readers about the dangers of the pesticide DDT and to its excessive use. You are linked to some YouTube clips below on the content page which show how popular this pesticide was and what it was used for. Mainly, it was used to control mosquito populations in suburban and rural areas. Please feel free to stop here and look at these clips. You might find them a bit disturbing. Like Leopold's short essay, Thinking Like a Mountain, Silent Spring is based on the concept of ecosystems. Here the term is defined and demonstrated within this image of a food chain. You might remember images like this from your high school biology class. Carson's basic argument was about the dangers of breaking that chain by eliminating one of the key components which would disrupt the ecosystem's larger checks and balances. Carson also tried to show that human ecology overlapped with natural ecology and that sick environments produced sick people. This idea is captured on the quotes written on this slide, so please pause and take a moment to review. Here we see another element of Carson's work which generates ongoing controversy. Silent Spring is organized according to the order of a standard food chain. Carson describes how toxins or poisons introduced to food chains in water and soil-based environments gradually permeate plant and insect populations and work their way up the food chain gradually into humans. This poisoning is more prevalent in monocultures or environments where one organism predominates an environment and where the system of natural checks and balances is more easily disrupted. In an environment of biological diversity, we see how many organisms combine to prevent any one from becoming too prominent. This point enables Carson to conclude that the, quote, best and cheapest controls for vegetation are not chemicals but other plants. As a whole, Silent Spring established that natural ecosystems have their own logic, and damage to them creates unintended and damaging consequences for the plant, animal, and human lives within them. Biodiversity, or biological diversity, strengthens any environment, and individual organisms within biologically diverse environments provide the best means to preserve the balance of the ecosystem as a whole. Organisms sprayed with poisons gradually develop a resistance to those poisons, and so chemical spraying offers short-term gains which ultimately create more resistant organisms. A profit-minded industry seeks to assure its own profitability, and so thrives on a continuous stream of ever stronger organisms to apply its products to. In the wake of its publication, Carson's final work generated controversy in its own time, but ultimately led to the formation of the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970 and the banning of DDT in 1972. Please pause and read this useful summary of Silent Spring's impact. This ban continues to generate controversy as shown on the website rachelwaswrong.org. You are linked to this site below, so if you have a minute, please check it out. Here are a couple of quotes from the book The Future by the well-known environmental advocate and former Vice President Al Gore. His conclusions here seem to relate directly to the arguments of Silent Spring. Please take a moment to pause and read these over and see if you can envision that connection. Carson is best known for Silent Spring, to the degree that this image of her work appears in the Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. My goal, however, is not to introduce you just to this influential work, but to those earlier works which established Carson's reputation and which anticipate the environmentalist dimensions to her signature work. I also want to make you aware of the complicated history of Silent Spring and the ongoing controversies associated with it, and also to assert its ongoing relevance in light of contemporary practices like fracking or hydraulic fracturing, which also introduce toxins into ecosystems and arguably prompt unintended consequences. With all of the materials gathered in this module, you should have plenty of resources to develop a full appreciation for Carson's impact and legacy. For now, I will thank you for listening to this presentation.